So I thought we'd start with a couple of questions. First one is, how many people die as a result of dehydration? Does that actually happen to anybody in the UK? Can you stick in the chat a guess at the number of dehydration-related deaths in England each year? And Joe, you might need to read them out because now I've shared my screen, I can't see the chat anymore.
I can absolutely do that. We have a guess of 50, 1,000, 5, 1,000. Another one that I need to scroll down for. 10, 100, 500.
Oh, we've got quite a range. So the actual answer, there's about 55. It's relatively uncommon, but you can see the people who are at risk of dehydration-related deaths are very much the elderly demographic. Okay, how many people die as a result of heat? And this time I'd like a guess at the number of excess deaths that were recorded in England during the heatwave periods last year. So excess over what the normal death rate would be. Are you able to read the chat? Yeah.
We have guesses of 1,500, 300, 250, 150.
Much bigger, 1,300. So it's lots. And again, the risk demographics are very much the very young and the very old. So what set me off to look at this in the first place was this year's JK, where we had one of the competitors in the older women's age group arrive back at the finish very dehydrated indeed, to the extent that she was sort of shaky and had to be helped back to the club tent. And it was an event that had a water station, and the water station was marked on the map, and the competitor did know that she was dehydrated after she'd been out nearly 2 hours doing something that was physically challenging. And she diverted to the water station to ask for help, but was refused water because she wasn't an elite runner. So that was what set me off in the first place. And as you probably know, I wrote an article in CompassSport. The planner for the event very kindly responded to the CompassSport article to explain what had happened. So the water points were specifically positioned to comply with IOF rules for elite courses. Fair enough. The weather on the day was warmer than expected and the demand for water was high. It became apparent that the water was going to run out before the later elite runners reached the drink station, and the marshals were told only to allow elite to drink, and meanwhile hasty efforts were made to replenish the supplies, and they wanted to offer their apologies on behalf of the organising team to anybody who was affected by that. So the two sides to this, the heat and the dehydration, I'm going to tackle dehydration first. What do the rules of orienteering currently require? Well, there are already some rules. 18.6 tells you that any course with a winning time over 75 minutes must have water provision at least once, ideally between 50 and 70% of the distance. Should be provided in pre-poured cups, and other refreshments such as sports drinks can be provided at the organiser's discretion. Then it also has 11.13, the organiser is responsible for deciding what action to take, for example, such as delaying or cancelling an event, shortening courses, or providing water points in exceptional circumstances. This includes extreme weather conditions. So if we take JK 2025 as an event that had actually been correctly planned, assuming that for most of it water was available to anybody who was in need, there were water points. They were advertised in the final details for courses 1 to 3, which had planning winning times of 90 minutes. Course 4, although it wasn't advertised in the final details as having water points, did have them. It also had a planned winning time of 90 minutes. Most other courses did pass at least one of the drink station, and when I went digging in the figures, of the 1,201 finishers who were out for more than 75 minutes, only 134 of them wouldn't have passed a water point. Of those 134, 64 were out for more than 90 minutes, 11 for 120 minutes, 6 for 150 minutes. So those who were out for more than 90 minutes included 8 who were aged over 80. So the information on that slide, there's a variety of questions that we might like to tackle later. Why 75 minutes? Why a winning time of 75 minutes rather than looking at something that takes into account the range of competitors? Why course rather than class? So, for example, at the JKs, course 6 was won in just over 70 minutes, but there was another class of competitors, a female class, where the winning competitor took 107 minutes. What do we mean by exceptional in terms of heat? And should there be some sort of increased focus on water for older, younger people who might be more vulnerable to dehydration? So all things we might want to unpack later on. So then I looked at what other sports do. Athletics, so we've got an example here for long distance runs. Water shall be available at suitable intervals of approximately 5 kilometres. So 10-kilometre race, you're expected to win in 45 minutes. You'd have water available after 20 to 25 minutes. A cycling example. So this time a road race likely to be won in 150 minutes, 2 feed stations. But it's worth noting that, of course, cyclists, when they fill up a water bottle, that lasts them for a considerable period. It's not a one-off single cup. Tennis, they allow players to take drinks between points, as well as having longer breaks between games and sets, and additional longer breaks in hot weather. Football matches, where it's obviously broken into halves normally, so no longer than 45 minutes between drinks, additional breaks to reduce it to 30 minutes in hot weather. Hockey breaks matches into halves and quarters, so no more than 35 minutes, and in hot weather every 7.5 minutes. And the American College of Sports Medicine recommends hydration stations every 2 to 3 kilometres. So let's say 12 minutes or so in running races. Though, of course, they do cover some areas which have much more extreme temperatures than we have in the UK. But from all of those, you can see orienteering is very much on the high side. So what are the issues that are specific to orienteering? Well, I think we all know getting water out into the terrain is hard. The requirement for pre-poured drinks is very heavy on volunteers, and clearing up cups that have been left spread out in the forest is a pain in the neck. Potential solutions from other sports, again, things we might want to discuss further after the presentation. Fell runners, they insist that people take liquid with them. The O-Ringen brings in water bowsers and provides canes on which everybody dutifully stacks their empty cups upside down after they've finished drinking. And the other thing that contributed, I think, in the JK case was there was no water available at the start. The start was quite remote from the assembly area, so our dehydrated competitor had not only been out for more than 2 hours on her course, she'd also been out an extra 40 minutes getting to the start, and she confessed to having limited her fluid intake before that, knowing that there weren't going to be any toilets at the start. So there's some multiple things contributing there. Joe, before I move on to heat exhaustion, have you anything in the chat relating to dehydration?
Nothing thus far. You are good to continue.
Okay, so moving on to the second half of it then, heat exhaustion, high temperatures. What do the rules of orienteering say about that? So the organiser is responsible for deciding what action to take, such as delaying or cancelling events or shortening courses in exceptional circumstances. This includes extreme weather conditions, which may consist of, and heat is included in that list of things. It also says measures should be in place to deal with the likely effects of the extreme weather conditions, such as drinks points, clothing requirements, curtailment of courses. And it goes on for long, ultra long organisers, making sure that competitors are aware of minimum equipment and sustenance requirements. So that could include drink requirements. What temperatures constitute extreme weather? Well, it doesn't really say. What's reasonable in terms of mitigations when that temperature is reached? Again, doesn't really say. And what about the impact of things like humidity and wind speed and sun and shade on the heat risks? Again, doesn't really say. So again, thought we'd have a look at what other sports do. And there was a review published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine at the time of the last Olympics, which looked at the policies in place for each of the 45 Olympic sports. And it divided them up into different risk levels. And of the 15 sports that were identified as high, very high, or extreme risk for heat-induced illness, all but one, which was the newly introduced 3x3 basketball, had a policy in place, and 12 had a policy in place where mitigations were required or recommended based on some stated trigger level. The most common measure that they used for those trigger levels was something called wet bulb globe temperature. So we're going to have a look at what that is. So it provides an index reading which reflects the impact of the environment on the actual participant. So not just the heat, but the humidity, the wind speed, the amount of sun. And it's generated by combining three elements. So we've got dry bulb temperature, measuring the normal air temperature, if you like. We've got wet bulb temperature, which takes account of the humidity and the wind speed. So works by having a wet cloth over the bulb. And the evaporation depends on the humidity and the wind speed, and sort of mimics how easy it is to cool down by sweating. And then also the black globe thermometer, where the thermometer sits inside a black globe, and that measures the impact of the sun. So you combine all three and you get wet bulb globe temperature, which we're going to talk about a lot from now on. And it's also worth noting that the UK Defence Services use the same measure to determine the length of time for which they allow their people to do strenuous activities. So here's a summary of what I found for some other sports. So you can see a wet bulb globe temperature of around about 30. People start insisting on shortening events, additional breaks. And around 32, people start cancelling things. And the UK Defence Services, they actually provide a number of minutes that they will allow people to engage in hard or moderate work at those different threshold levels. And you can see as you head up above 32, it drops very rapidly till you're only allowed to actually exercise for 15 minutes before you need a break. So then I moved on to how often is that actually going to be an issue in the UK? And I need to confess that since first publishing in CompassSport Cup, I've had an exchange with the IOF people who've done the interim guidance, and during that exchange we concluded that the sun figures that I'd taken from one of the Southern England weather stations are not reliable. There's definitely something odd about them. The peaks that it's giving are higher than it's possible at our latitude. So I have reworked the table, and I've reworked the table. There's a US website which gives you an estimate based on the latitude, and I've just used that. And obviously, since first publishing in the CompassSport magazine, we've also had the interim guidance, so I've added you a column for that as well. So if we look at the hottest days in each month last year, There are 4 months, June, July, August, September, in which the hottest day would have potentially been a problem. If we look at the average days, there's no day on which you would have needed to cancel an event. But it's worth thinking about that. We have quite a lot of events. We have Scottish Six Days in August. We have often the YBT final in July. So there's quite a lot of quite big events happen during that window where the hottest day could actually be a danger. So what I've been doing for Southdowns events is I've been doing a calculation. So here's an example taken from when we had an amber weather warning in place in July for a heat wave. So we looked up, it was actually at Withdean, and we looked up the forecast for the Saturday we were going to do it on. It gave a highest temperature of 26. It gave a relative humidity of 42. It gave a lowest wind speed of 17 kilometers an hour. And UK forecasts don't include solar irradiance at the moment, though I have prompted the Met Office saying, wouldn't it be lovely if they did? So we've got a typical value, 775 watts per meter squared, taken from that US website that allows you to estimate based on latitude. So if I feed those into an outdoor calculator online, I've given you 2 links there that we can provide to people in the chat later. The answer that we get is 24.4. So we're well below the 30, which is the level we're starting to really worry about things. And this is, in any case, was an event where we were expecting people to take 15 to 30 minutes. It's a sprint. So if it had been above 30, I would have checked individual hourly forecast values, because as the temperature goes up, the relative humidity tends to fall. So by putting in the highest temperature and the highest relative humidity for the whole period, I will have tended to overestimate. Just a note to make sure that people are aware of that. So the mitigations we chose to put in place, warning about bringing water, organiser bringing water which can be made available to anybody who needs it, and making sure that the start queue and the SI team were kept in the shade. Then, of course, we had the tragic death at the World Games in China. So I've done the example calculation for that. I found some historic figures for temperature, humidity, wind speed. Again, not solar irradiation. So again, I used the calculator that gives me the one based on the latitude. We can see from the photos that it was sunny. So taking their sunny day figure. And you can see that as the day wore on, we went well above the 30 to 32, which is the recommended, thinking about cancelling. If it was UK Defence Services, they'd have been limited to 35 minutes. So it's hard to conclude anything other than that an event where people were going to be out running around for that length of time shouldn't have gone ahead. So as a result of that, the IOF has brought out some guidelines on extreme heat. I've chopped them up onto a set of slides, just going to go through fairly briefly. So it reiterates that organisers must stop or postpone or cancel a race if it becomes clear that circumstances have arisen which make it dangerous, and that the guidance is aiming to tell organisers what constitutes dangerous in the context of extreme heat. They've said they apply to all events covered by IOF competition rules where the expected winning time is 20 minutes or greater, and they're expecting to have more detailed guidance before the Northern Hemisphere summer. Factors that influence heat stress, highlighting that it's not just high temperatures, but also humidity matters a lot. And that direct sunlight is a lot more of a problem than shaded areas or cloudy conditions. They've looked at critical thresholds, and like almost every other sports governing body, they've decided wet bulb globe temperature is the way to go. And they are recommending considering cancellation or postponement if it exceeds 30 to 32. At this point, it doesn't give specific guidance for particular groups, such as the older competitors, or on the potential role of acclimatisation, but they are expected to be part of the final guidance. So there are two ways that we can get hold of a wet bulb globe temperature. We can either measure it directly using an instrument. I did have a dig around on pricing of instruments. The sort that guarantee to give you something within plus or minus 1 degree are thousands of pounds. There are small handheld things, but plus or minus 2 to 3 degrees. So if you were using one of those, you would have to take into account its likely accuracy. It does note that in some countries, wet bulb globe temperature may be reported by the Met Service, and if so, you can use those observations. The other option is calculating it, like I was doing, using an online calculator. They acknowledge it's not going to be practical for most people to measure it directly. So what they've done for the interim guidance is they've created a table. So I'm just going to flick down so you see the table. It's got temperature along one side and relative humidity along the other side. What they've said is shows WBGT for a given temperature and humidity. For example, 34 degrees C, 30% humidity. So that's conditions that were typical of the World Masters competition, which people felt was hot this year. The calculation gives 29. So let's just go and show what that is. 34, 30. So 34 degrees C, 30%, there's your 29. And then they've said as an approximate rule of thumb, in the shade, it's typically 4 to 5 degrees C cooler. Part of the problem in Chengdu was that it was very much out in the open. Okay, so then it goes on saying, when we assess it, it's important to calculate it using temperature and humidity measured at the same time. Relative humidity tends to decrease with increasing temperature, so it's not appropriate to combine a forecast maximum temperature with a relative humidity at a fixed time. That was what I was saying before about if my first stab by putting in the maximum across the period had approached 30, I would have done it for individual hourly values from the weather forecast. In most countries, current temperature and humidity observations are available through local meteorological websites or apps. If these are used, you need to check the location because if you're in a mountainous area or if you're near the coast, if you're higher up, the temperature will be cooler. If you're nearer the coast, the temperature will be cooler. So you need to know where you are compared to where the temperature measurements are. And if you measure temperature directly and humidity directly, you need to take care to do it with instruments that are used appropriately and appropriately screened and sheltered, used as per the manufacturer's instructions. Then it goes on to talk about what event officials can do to limit the impacts of extreme heat. And it gives some suggestions, which again, we might want to talk about after the end of the presentation. So scheduling events as early in the day as possible before temperatures rise, ensuring sufficient shade is available, using shade structures if needed, in arenas, pre-start areas, quarantine areas. Provide additional refreshment points above the minimum. Consider a cooler remote quarantine if used in a more distant place to shorten the time in the heat. Consider shortening quarantine times and delay opening of GPS tracking and so on. Provide cooling aids like iced water sponges, cold water cooling fans. Course design considerations, including use of loops and arena or spectator controls and run-throughs to allow athletes to be regularly monitored. Options to shorten courses. Closer monitoring of GPS tracking with health checks considered based on the GPS movements. If someone's stopped moving or started moving very slowly, get somebody out to them. And medical support provided, including the availability of baths, ice baths, other means of cooling, if it's got to a heat stroke situation. So over the last couple of days, I've been having some discussions with a member of the IOF team. I just thought I'd summarise here. So the team includes a meteorologist who works with the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. They've contracted an exercise physiology research group to provide their scientific advice. And they're hoping that the final output will be something a bit more sophisticated than the simplified table that's in the interim guidance. And ideally, they're looking for something that's relatively easy for organisers to use. So you have to put in the temperature, the humidity, maybe the time of day, the season, some indication of the shade level. And it then goes away and crunches the numbers in the background to provide the risk information for you. And my final learning point, which was don't necessarily believe local weather station solar irradiation figures. I'm told by this guy who's a meteorologist that they are notoriously difficult to calibrate and maintain, to the extent that the Australians have actually given up doing it, apart from the very few stations that they need to cross-check their satellite data. Okay, over to Joe.
Can I go back to a question for you first?
Yeah,
Just
you
be
can.
difficult. Had a couple of questions in from Ian, just asking about some of the tables earlier on for the wet globe bulb temperatures. I'll get that one day. Asking whether the targets should be lower. They're based on pretty fit age groups. So should these targets be lower if you're looking at age groups, for example, over 80s?
Yeah, and that's partly why the IOF have engaged the sports science people to do them some research, because there's not a lot of research about sporty people in their 80s.
And are there any rules by age from World Masters?
I don't believe there are at the moment, but my contact did say that one of the things they were hoping to do was to provide more guidance about at-risk groups. Because actually, it's not just older people. People who are on blood pressure medication are an at-risk group for heat exhaustion.
Absolutely. And Ian's also mentioned some mitigations as well, including buses for over 80s to start for long distance, and shadows at some distance behind for all over 90s, which have been used at World Masters as well. Some years.
Yep. All good mitigations.
Okay, so I'll just move on to my brief part about the response from British Orienteering. But naturally with the events that did occur, tragically, we've made a commitment, of course, that safety is at the forefront of what we're doing, and the formation of the safety advisory group has been a big step in that, as well as many of you will have seen and used the incident reporting system as well. What we are at the moment, the position is that we have the IOF interim guidance, and we're also awaiting the full guidance from the IOF. But what we do have as well is a very good opportunity to, very conveniently, with Karen as our chair of the safety advisory group, be able to actually look at the issues a bit deeper for our specific climate as well. Obviously, there will be areas in the world with a lot higher temperatures than ours, but also over the previous years, as we'll all have known and felt, especially if you're out running, we are reaching temperatures now which would be seen previously only more on the European continent. We're very keen to have some guidance out And whilst we are waiting for some additional from the IOF, we do have work going on, the work that Karen's been doing as well. And we do also have some work as well. Hopefully there should be something coming out soon. A bit of research going on as well into hydration and also overheating as well, with the future working with somebody from the Carnegie School of Sport at the University of Leeds to deliver some more information on that as well from a safety standpoint, and then also with the other side of a performance standpoint as well. We're looking forward to working with that partnership to be able to see the important safety data, and also to be able to provide some good educational content as well for our members. I'm very pleased to say that the first meeting of the Safety Advisory Group was very positive, and across all fronts and all things safety, we have a strong group with a good amount of work to do. But we are taking very seriously at British Orienteering, especially with what's happened across the last months. Our response as well to safety around heat, and also around other conditions, any extreme temperatures from hot to cold, as well as other weather conditions that we might see. I'm happy to hand back over.
So we've got one from Barry saying the nearest sport to orienteering is fell running. Surely if you're at risk due to not having access to water, then it makes sense to carry some with you rather than rely on others. What do people feel about the idea of orienteering competitions making water compulsory in the same way that they would make backup lighting in a night competition compulsory? Anybody want to volunteer an opinion?
See a hand up from Jane.
You want to unmute yourself, Jane?
Yeah, there seems to be quite a lot of reluctance within the orienteering arena to consider carrying our own water. We've run a series of map runs, particularly for running clubs in our area. And even when they come to really short, easy events on a cool day, they all wear little water vests with perhaps a litre of water each. And I don't know why orienteers seem to be so reluctant to do that.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean, if we're talking about the amount of water that we're looking as if we need to provide for these events, and it looks like a lot more than we generally do. And Karen, you raised the point that it's a lot of effort to get the water out there. There's a lot of volunteer capacity needed to keep the water cups full and to pick up the cups, even if people do put them on sticks and they get blown away. For a recent event we had, we needed an additional 5 volunteers, and that was only for one water station. If we're looking at providing water stations in more places along our courses, then we're looking at a lot of volunteers in a sport that's really struggling for volunteers. And it just makes sense to me to ask people to carry their own water.
Yeah, and I mean, it may also depend on the type of terrain. There are some terrains where it's extremely difficult to provide suitable water stations at all. Others where it's relatively easy. You've got in Sussex, we have path networks and tracks. It's relatively easy compared to up on the moors, for example.
Yeah, but just the fact that you're supporting many different courses going on many different routes. It's very different to fell running, where everybody might be running the same course. It's just a lot harder for orienteering where there's lots of different courses.
Yeah, it's a planning problem as well.
Yeah, it is.
I think some of the problem is the terrain, isn't it? Because if you're running through the woods and you're trying to get yourself through all these through bushes and everything, you don't want things that are going to get snagged on anything. So that they tend generally to have a minimal amount of kit to do that. Whereas the fell runners, it's more open. But a lot of the big races, it's mandatory that they have to have a certain amount of water or
And prove
of
that they've
food.
got water left at the end of the event.
Yeah,
And food.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just not in our psyche as orienteers, whereas the fell runners, like Jane said, it's just automatic. You see, we did a park, a level D event, and they were coming around with the water bottles, and it looked quite strange.
Yeah.
You know,
It's almost
But
like
it's a
we
good
think
idea.
it's a bit sissy.
Yeah, we do have
it's
an
not in our
element
culture.
of the macho amongst the demographic, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not in our culture to do it, and you know.
Yeah.
But well, that needs to change.
Absolutely.
Got a hand
We
from
force people to wear cagoule in bad weather.
Yep.
Why can we not say it's compulsory to carry water in hot weather?
yeah, I mean, people would obviously have to be warned in the final details that was going to be the case. But
And you'd have to buy the wherewithal to do it, because these little vests probably don't come cheap, and not everybody wants to carry a litre of water in a bum bag.
Yeah.
Around their waist.
we've got another hand up from Rob Woods.
Hi, Karen. I've got a couple of observations that I'll come to a bit later on, but I just wanted to pick up on that comment that somebody made about we've got a culture of being macho and therefore don't want to be safe. Let me tell you, one of the most macho, or perhaps considered macho, organisations in the UK military not only gets people to take water with them, but they also actually fit them with body monitors during some of their training, something called OBAN, I think it's the Open Body Area Network System. So they literally monitor their physiological condition during the training event. And that's in one of the most elite elements of the British military. They don't care whether it's seen to be, considered weak in doing it. They're interested in staying alive.
Yeah.
So, we have got no excuse, quite frankly, to do the best we possibly can for our athletes, in my opinion. I'll leave it there. I've got a couple of other points I'll come to at the end. I'll say for the end, but I just wanted to pick up on that because I think if that is a culture, then through training and education, we need to change it.
Yeah, agreed. And there's also very much a culture amongst event officials of, if we make it compulsory, then we will have to check for it at the start.
Rob, is that your hand very rapidly back up, or did you just click the button twice? I think that's click the button twice.
Annie just said we check for whistles and cags.
Yeah. I still find resistance from people when I say no, in that event you do need to make backup lighting compulsory. I find resistance from people who don't want to have to bother to check every competitor's carrying it, and to stop people running if they aren't.
But somebody's just died.
Yeah.
And and in the past, Rob, I know we've lost military personnel in exercises, things on Dartmoor, and I'm sure when somebody dies doing something, an awful lot of work goes into trying to prevent that happening again. And it seems to me that compared to the body monitors that Rob's talking about, then carrying a water bottle is the least we can do.
I was at an event and I was out for quite a long time.
Scottish 6 days.
Scottish 6 days. It's a really long way to the start. It was a hot day, a long way back, and I felt really quite rubbish. And I asked the first aid tent on the way back, I said, could I just have a sip of water? And they said, no, it's not for you. And yeah.
It was half an hour back to assembly, and they'd run out of water.
They'd all run out of water. And one of the vendors on one of the vans, he could say I wasn't looking very well, and he gave me his own personal bottle out of his fridge because I felt really unwell. But first aid said no. So because I might not look like I'm really old, or I'm really young, or I'm really this, so I don't know. But I wouldn't have asked if I'd not needed it at the time, but they said no.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad to hear from Joe that we've commissioned some
Mm.
research into hydration. Long overdue. Rob, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, so let me give you a bit of personal context here of hard-learned lessons about this. Just picking up, Jane, on what you said. I was the first Chief of Staff in 2015 in Defence's Safety Authority, its new regulatory body, which wasn't only responsible for regulating activity across all environments, but it was also responsible for the Defence Accident Investigation Branch, which investigated fatal or near fatal accidents in all three branches of the armed forces. And we had a number of fatalities around that time that were part of the reason the body was set up, particularly in the Brecon Beacons. And all of those investigations led to recommendations that have now been implemented. Whether that's wet bulb globe temperature readings being mandatory for every single element of physical exercise, whether that's at local unit level or something, involving SAS selection. It's done for everybody. It's mandatory. Training for everybody annually is mandatory in climatic injury prevention. And then we have a very comprehensive reporting system now, so that any incidents beyond the particular degree of severity are captured and the lessons learned from those. So we have a very swept up system now, and you can go online and see that. It's publicly accessible, and you can see all of the accident investigations as well if you want to dive into how those lessons were hard learned. So the reason I say all of that is because the MOD were told in no uncertain terms that if it didn't put its house in order, then it would be absolutely, it would be, if it didn't correct its failings, which it has done now, and there's always lessons, but it's corrected those main failings, the court would not look favourably. And I work very closely with a QC, now a KC, chap called Sir Charles Haddon Cave, and he boiled it down really simply to me, and it's firmly in my head now, in the role in British Orienteering. If you've done everything that is a reasonable person would have expected you to do, you'll be supported in a court of law. But if you've not done the basics, things that the reasonable person would have thought you should have done, then watch out. And I think there are things that the reasonable person on the street, he used to say, the person on the Clapham omnibus, the man or woman on the Clapham omnibus, what would they expect you to have done? So we need to really think hard about that and learn the lessons from other tragic incidents like happened in Chengdu, learn from all the stuff that's gone on in defence before and go, right, what's reasonable for us to do? And you've already talked about some of those steps. And I think we do need to address those, because if something does happen, it's too late. It's too late then. I'll stop there.
We've got some chat messages, shall we?
Yes, I was working my way up and down through the chat, trying to keep tabs on everything. Although I will potentially just ask on a couple. So Barry's said that he thinks it should be compulsory, but it's up to the competitor. I wonder, Barry, if I could maybe pick on you. Is that, I suppose, potentially, if we're bringing this in as a safety measure, obviously what we'd want is the even playing field. So would it be non-compulsory then just not lead to the most competitive ones maybe forgoing the water and putting themselves at risk?
Can you hear me? I put my mic on rather than typing.
Yes.
I think the difference is you've got courses with 50-minute winning times, 55-minute winning times for, say, someone like myself. And I will get round in an hour. So probably cope without water. There are people on that same course in the same age category who take 2 hours and therefore probably do or potentially do need to carry water. So I can't, making it compulsory seems to me to be overkill. There are competitors who know they can cope for that length of time in reasonably warm weather and get round and not need a drink. Others clearly can't. So I think it's not, that's the problem with using the course winning times, which I think has been mentioned earlier. That, you've got people again, in the older age groups, the better competitors will be rounding well under an hour, but you will get people on the same courses out for 2 hours. And I think you've really got to say to people who know they will take that long that, I'm sorry, you have to become self-sufficient and take your own water, because if you're taking 2 hours to do 3 kilometers, are you really going to have drink stations every 600 or 700 meters around the course for them? Which is what effectively you might be suggesting. So I think it's a lot of it's got to be down to the competitors to judge and be self-sufficient. If they think they will need water, then they should take it with them.
We've got a hand up from the DVO group again. Do you want to?
I will stop at that point.
Barry, we don't, when we say CAGs are mandatory, we do mean CAGs are mandatory, because if somebody falls off the edge of a cliff in the Lake District and is in the wet and the cold for 2 hours, then they're going to need the CAG. Is the same not true about the water then? I mean, you might be able to get round in an hour, but if you injure yourself and you're away from where people are going to find you, then you could be in a similar position as somebody taking 2 hours. You could be trying to crawl back up that crag with no water.
But I'm not running myself to exhaustion and dehydration if I'm stuck trying to climb up a crag route. Anyway, and in a lot of cases, it's not. We're talking more about time in particular environments, and we make people carry a crag because anybody could get hurt, and you don't know, and you need a CAG if it's pouring down with rain. I can't see that making people carry water who won't need it.
I just think we don't know if we're going to need it or not.
Well, you're not going to die in 2 hours, are you? If you don't get anything to drink, if you're not exercising.
Yeah,
I think military experience with the cadets out on moorland suggests that perhaps you are.
Yeah, and the young man in China,
Matthews. Yeah,
there's a huge difference between what he was doing in China and what the average person is doing in the UK. I mean, the temperatures there were extreme and the humidity, and he was pushing himself to his limit.
I think that the golden answer's already been given in the chat from Rob, which is the key being the dynamic risk assessment for both organizer and individual.
Yeah.
Needs to be a combination. Sometimes it may need to be mandated. If we are at a point of an event where the likelihood of this is so much higher, then ultimately, whilst it may cause some people to be unhappy, I think it's important that at some point you can have the event organizer put the foot down and say, right, this will be mandatory, and of course that to be communicated well in good time.
So the
danger of relying on drink stations is that, as was found at the JK, you can run out. And I remember probably 30 years ago running a national event in South Wales on a baking hot day. This was when I was probably an M21 or an M35, and it was so hot and there were so many people that by the time I got there was no water left, and there was a lot of us going through with no water at all, and really they had no way of getting more water out there. So I think it has to come down to, you can't rely on other people, especially if you think you definitely will need it. That you should become, you need to be self-sufficient.
So
in that case, maybe you do get down to saying, if you're doing these courses, you have to carry water with you.
The example I would give, Barry, was if you'd been organising a course during that heat wave in 2022 or 23 when we got to 40 degrees, surely you would have mandated. You would have cancelled, because that would have taken it above the threshold. But
was it 40 degrees at 10 o'clock in the morning? This is the other thing you need to think about. Most of our peak temperatures are in the afternoon, aren't they? Lunchtime and onwards. So you move the race forward rather than cancelling it.
Yeah, I mean, there are always options to move to cooler times.
Absolutely. I'll just pick up a couple of extra messages in the chat. as all the discussions gone on, we're going quite well. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Barry. Apologies for picking on you in that case, but I think it's opened up some really good discussion. There was. I also saw that Paul mentioned in the chat about encouraging some self-reliance. The same point that I believe the DVO pair mentioned, that it will be further burden on volunteers, and we don't always operate from a venue with that infrastructure to support easy water provision, but we need to be able to cope with emergencies. I think that's a very important point. A question we had from Quentin and Ruth: how is water to be used best impact? Drunk for dehydration or poured over the head and neck to reduce overheating?
I think we might need input from our sports science people to answer that.
Yeah, I think that's a question for somebody who's more qualified than me, unfortunately. Yeah, but I will come back to it. I'll note that one down actually to try and get you an answer via email more directly. Ronan and Julie mentioned the World Games in China. Unusually, both temperature and relative humidity were increasing as the day wore on, contrary to what normally happens.
So whilst I'd got my Australian meteorologist talking to me, I asked him about that, and he says he thinks China has a lot of agriculture that involves, I'm not going to say paddy fields, but you know what I mean, a lot of heavily watered agriculture, and he thinks that is potentially a cause for the humidity rising at the same time as the temperature.
Just on the discussion we had earlier about the hydration vests, Jennifer's mentioned that a 2-litre hydration vest from a well-known discount sports store, unnamed, is about £20. So the hydration bladders are also similar. So there's no reason why a competitor shouldn't be expected to carry water on that front. I know there's a lot of shops now selling discount ones. I think also the big surge in running as well. The trend as well's brought a lot of competition into there to bring prices down. So that's a good feasible option. Alan said 40 degree in summer doesn't mean the wet bulb temperatures is anywhere near that if the humidity is low.
Yeah, that's true.
That is true. And Rob has put in the defence policy. And there's a link in there, which means I've got some homework for later as well.
I think I should probably extract all of the links that are in my presentation, and you should put them round as well, which does, I think, include a link to the appendix with the work rate tables from the Ministry of Defence.
I think that's very reasonable. I'm happy to circulate any and all links, get as much out as well. Do we have any more questions? As I'm seeing, it's almost quite perfectly landed us at 8 o'clock. But do we have any more questions or comments? I'll just do a quick sweep of the Q&A as well. See a hand from Rob.
Yeah, just very quick one, and forgive me, everybody, for saying this, but I bang on about it at every opportunity. I know we're talking about heat this evening, but we must think about climatic injury in its broadest sense, because cold is equally a killer. And I remember being very, very close to banging out on an event in the drifting snow on Clee Hill a few years ago. I don't know if anybody else was there, but it was horrendous. And the event probably shouldn't have gone ahead, because if somebody had gone down in one of those snowdrifts, we almost certainly would never have found them, or they've got severe hypothermia. So we need to think about cold as well in this country, and think about, maybe a topic for another evening. But what does that look like, and are we doing all that we should do under those circumstances? Thanks.
Yes, we've got a comment and wind, which is definitely one of the things that the Safety Advisory Group is wanting to advise on.
Absolutely, and everything that's been discussed this evening, I'll be making sure to keep notes of any of the good points as well, because everything's really good to be able to circulate for the Safety Advisory Group as well for a bit more further discussion as well. there was a comment in from Alan, and I think it's a good one. It's notable how many marathon runners collapse at the finish line. At a minimum, in very hot weather, providing water at the finish might be a good idea. I think that's very reasonable.
Yeah, especially if you've got a remote finish. It doesn't normally apply to big competitions because people are coming back into the arena as they finish. But if it's remote, that would be really important.
And Alex has said that they agree participants have to take responsibility for their own safety, but fundamentally the organiser must be able to justify that they've acted reasonably to keep people at the event safe.
Yep.
That's a good rounding sentiment for it. I think if you're happy for me to close, Karen, then
Yep.
I'll draw things to an end. A huge thank you, first of all, to Karen for all the hard work in the presentation as well. I can see some thumbs up from Quentin and Ruth over there, so that's well reflected. But I think this is a really good example of just the exemplary work that you'll be doing, and hopefully carrying that through to the chairing of the safety advisory group. As a hint, it's already exemplary. So we're looking to work hard on that front. And a huge thank you to everybody for attending this evening. It's been a really good turnout and very engaging as well. Good to see.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Good to see so much discussion in the chat. And also good to have a good number of people muting as well. And I can see plenty of cameras as well, which I always enjoy. I'll do a very small plug, but there should be some information coming about the development conference. That'll be coming out in the next week. I'm touching wood on that front. So if keep your eyes peeled for your email boxes and also for the British Orienteering website, and an even more specific plug, but there will be a session from the safety advisory group. So if you enjoyed the session of Karen, then there'll be plenty more to come, and I'll also be joining her again on that one as well in a presenting capacity this time, which is a bit scary. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending this evening. It's great to see everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Goodbye.